I thought the worst part was surviving the attack, but I was wrong. The worst part was realizing it didn't stay in the forest. I know that because I've seen it again. I've been a park ranger for a little over 8 years now. My days were predictable in a way I liked, starting early with radio check-ins at the station, logging weather conditions, and going over any reports from the night before, which were usually minor things, like hikers setting up camp where they shouldn't, someone hearing an animal too close to the trail, or occasionally a lost tourist who underestimated how quickly the sun disappears once you're deep enough in the forest. After that, I would head out on patrol, sometimes on foot, sometimes by truck depending on the area, checking trail markers, clearing debris, making sure nothing looked out of place, and for the most part, nothing ever did. You learn what normal looks like out there, and more importantly, what it sounds like: birds, insects, distant movement in the brush. Even the wind has a pattern to it, and when something breaks that pattern, you notice. That's why, when I got the assignment, something about it didn't sit right from the beginning, even though on paper it sounded routine. My supervisor, Daniels, called me into his office near the end of my shift, which was unusual on its own because he was the kind of guy who avoided unnecessary conversations whenever possible. And when I stepped in, he didn't waste time with small talk. He handed me a thin folder and told me there had been a few reports coming from a restricted section of the park, an area that wasn't technically off limits, but hadn't been maintained in years due to environmental concerns, which was vague enough to mean almost anything. I flipped through the reports and noticed they weren't from hikers, which would have been normal, but from other staff, and even those were incomplete. Short descriptions that didn't really explain anything beyond phrases like unusual animal activity and disturbances near boundary markers. When I asked for clarification, Daniels just told me to take a look, document anything out of place, and report back, his tone flat in a way that felt rehearsed rather than dismissive. There was no map included in the folder, just rough coordinates, and when I pointed that out, he said I wouldn't need one if I followed the old service road far enough, which was the first real red flag. We don't send people into unmaintained areas without proper mapping, not unless someone already knows exactly what's out there. Still, I didn't push it. Assignments like that weren't common, but they weren't unheard of either, and I figured it was just one of those things that had been overlooked for too long. I headed out early the next morning, taking the truck as far as I could before the road became too overgrown to continue. And from there, I went on foot, following what used to be a path, but had since been mostly reclaimed by the forest. At first, everything felt normal. The air was cool, the ground soft from recent rain, and the usual sounds were there: birds calling from above, insects buzzing low to the ground, the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. But the deeper I went, the more those sounds started to thin out, not suddenly, but gradually enough that I didn't notice it right away, until I stopped to check my bearings and realized how quiet it had become. Not silent exactly, but wrong. The kind of quiet that feels like it's pressing in on you. I kept moving, telling myself it was just a shift in the environment, maybe fewer animals in that part of the park. But then I started noticing the trees. Some of them were marked, not with official trail signs or anything recognizable, but with deep cuts in the bark, uneven and jagged, like something had dragged itself against them repeatedly. And the higher I looked, the further those marks went up, far beyond what any normal animal could reach. I took photos, made notes, tried to stay focused on the job, but there was a growing feeling in the back of my mind that I wasn't just documenting something unusual, I was walking into something I didn't understand. My radio crackled once, sharp and sudden, making me flinch, and when I tried to respond, all I got was static, a low, distorted hum that almost sounded like breathing if I let myself think about it too long. That was around the time I noticed the smell. Faint at first, but impossible to ignore once it settled in. Something earthy and damp mixed with a sour, almost metallic edge that didn't belong in open air. I followed it without meaning to. And that's still the part I can't fully explain, because I should have turned back, should have reported the radio issue, and waited for backup. But instead, I kept going, moving slower now, more aware of every step and every shift in the trees around me. That's when I saw the tracks. Not clean prints, but impressions in the ground that suggested something heavy had passed through recently. Something that didn't move in a straight line, but in uneven, dragging motions, like parts of it weren't working the way they should. I crouched down to get a better look, and that was when I heard movement behind me, fast enough to make me turn immediately. But there was nothing there, just trees and shadow, and that same unnatural stillness. And for a moment, I convinced myself it had been a deer or something small moving off before I could see it. Then it happened again, closer this time, and when I turned, I caught it, just a glimpse between the trees. Something low to the ground, but too large to be anything I recognized. Its movement wrong in a way I can't fully describe, like it didn't follow the same rhythm as everything else in the forest. I stood up slowly, my hand already moving toward the radio, even though I knew it wasn't working. And that was when it stepped into view. Not fully, just enough to make my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. Its body looked incomplete, like it had been put together without a clear plan. Limbs too long in some places, too short in others. Its posture shifting constantly, as if it couldn't decide how it was meant to stand. And its skin, or what I could see of it, looked stretched and uneven, dark in some places and pale in others. And when it moved again, there was a sound that went with it, a wet, dragging noise that made my stomach tighten. I didn't wait. I started backing away, slow at first, trying not to provoke it. But the moment I took another step, it reacted, and it moved faster than anything that size should have been able to, closing the distance in seconds. It hit me hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs, sending me to the ground in a way that made everything flash white for a second. And after that, instinct took over. I don't remember deciding anything. I just moved, rolling, kicking, trying to create distance, catching brief, broken glimpses of it as I scrambled to my feet, its limbs striking the ground where I had been a second before, each movement accompanied by that same horrible sound. I ran, branches tearing at my clothes, the ground shifting under my feet, and I could hear it behind me, not chasing in a straight line but circling, cutting me off, forcing me to change direction again and again. At one point, Something caught my leg and pulled me down, and I remember thinking with complete clarity that I wasn't getting out of there, that this was where it ended. But then something changed. Something made it hesitate, and the pressure loosened just enough for me to pull free. I didn't look back after that. I just kept running until the sounds of the forest started to return, faint at first, then stronger, until I crossed some invisible boundary, and everything felt normal again, or at least normal enough. I made it back to the truck, barely holding it together, my leg bleeding, my hands shaking so badly I almost couldn't start the engine, and I drove straight back to the station without stopping. When I told Daniels what happened, he didn't react the way I expected. He didn't question me, didn't ask for details beyond the basics, and when I tried to explain what I had seen, he cut me off and told me I had probably encountered an injured animal reacting unpredictably. I told him that wasn't possible, that I knew what I saw, but he just nodded in that same flat way and told me to file a report and take a few days off. And that was it. No follow-up, no investigation, nothing. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 nights later, there was a knock on my door, and when I opened it, there were 2 men standing there, dressed plainly. Nothing about them standing out, but something about them felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. They asked to come in, and for some reason, I let them. They didn't sit. They just stood there asking questions about my report, about what I thought I saw, and every time I tried to describe it, they redirected me, rephrased things, suggested alternatives in a way that felt less like a conversation and more like they were guiding me toward a version of events they preferred. Eventually, one of them stepped closer and told me calmly that it would be better for everyone if I let the incident go, that misinterpretations happen, especially in isolated environments, and that continuing to pursue it could create unnecessary complications. He never raised his voice, but he didn't need to. By the time they left, I understood exactly what they meant. I didn't go back to work after that. I packed what I could, left town within the week, and told myself I was done with that life, that whatever was out there wasn't my responsibility anymore.